Hi, my name is Luna Canola, and I will be presenting on the Libby, Montana asbestos crisis. So some of the objectives of this presentation are to understand the dangers of asbestos, know the general area of the disaster, understand what is vermiculite and what role it plays into this, and the aftermath and the cleanup of the site. So this table of contents is just showing us some of the figures that we're going to go over. There will be a timeline of the events, a map of the affected area, a table with the risks of the exposure, and some other data showing those who were affected by this crisis. Some background to the disaster. Gold miners discovered vermiculite at the end of the 19th century. Vermiculite is a mineral that is usually used in construction and it expands when it is heated. Libby exported 80% of the world's vermiculite during the time that the mine was open, and it was open up until 1990. Once the mine did close, this is when we started seeing an increased rate of respiratory diseases that we had not seen in this area before. And during this time, it was also discovered that the mine was contaminated with a toxic form of asbestos. And this is known as LA. And it was present in the air, insulation, and bulk materials, in the indoor dust, soil, water, and animal fat. So it was accumulating in different areas. So the timeline of the disaster: in 1881, vermiculite was discovered by these gold miners. In the 1920s, the Zulay Company formed and mining for vermiculite specifically began, and then the mine was open up until 1990. During this time, there was an acquisition of the mine by a different company, and the company was aware of the presence of asbestos, but nothing was done about it. And then once the mine was closed in 1990, 1999, citizens and different media had started noticing the increased rates of respiratory disease and were starting to push the EPA or somebody to come and investigate what was happening. In 2000, the removal and cleanup process began. In 2002, it became a Superfund national program site affected. And in 2009, the EPA declares a public health emergency to help those that were affected by this crisis. And then in 2018, the cleanup is declared complete. So this is just a map of the main affected area, which is Libby, Montana. It is important to note that other areas were affected because the miners didn't just live in Libby, and they were taking these fibers home on their clothes. And also because of the vermiculite used, the asbestos fibers traveled. And so the area of the cleanup was mostly focused on this, but there are other areas that could have been affected. So some of the asbestos risks, I think the most important thing to note is that no amount of exposure to asbestos is safe. Even tiny fibers swallowed can lead to asbestosis or can lead to respiratory disease. Most of the risks are connected to different types of cancer. So there's cancer of the throat, there's mesothelioma, which is a rare type of cancer that can occur in the lungs and the abdomen. There's asbestosis, which is just difficulty breathing. And then there's also reports of ovarian cancer and cancer of the diaphragm and cancer of the sac of the heart. And it's important to note that these things take about 20 to 50 years to show up. Over time, over 600 deaths have been reported. Most of them have been related to respiratory disease, and it does not take into account the years of suffering prior, Anytime that you have a chronic illness or you have a form of cancer, it is usually a very lengthy battle. A lot of times we see this with people who have COPD or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. They need constant care. It affects their quality of life. They lose a lot of years that they could have been working. And so even though 600 deaths may not seem like a lot, we're also looking at a lot of people who suffering, and then the families were also suffering during this time. So the contamination was mostly in the air of homes, in soil, in just the outside air, and it contaminates the air through fibers. So it's actually really hard to measure how much asbestos was in this area. And although the cleanup is done, the residents of Libby are still concerned that there may be more contamination that has just not been addressed because of how hard it is to measure and how unaware you might be while you're walking, let's say, in like an area near the mine. And in this graph, it shows us that the soil was the most contaminated. So this is probably due to the fact that soil is constantly moved by like wind. When the mine closed, areas were moved anytime that there was construction. And then for the cleanup, cleanup began in 2000 and was declared complete in 2018. And in this line graph, you can see the level of asbestos at 1.5 fibers per cubic centimeter, and then going down to 0.001 in 2018. It is still reported that there is some contamination. Again, it's really hard to get rid of everything. Usually with asbestos, if it is present in like construction or anything, you have to encapsulate it and then get rid of it. And then the residents are still pushing for more cleanup, which I think is really important to note.